We're going to go ahead and get started. So thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Johanna Newman. I'm the Senior Director of the Campaign for 100% Renewable Energy at Environment America Research and Policy Center. And I'm today's MC. So we're really glad that you're here. Today's event is being recorded, and we'll share a recording to everyone who's RSVP'd for the event via email afterwards. We'll also be able to post the recording on our website after the fact. I'll share briefly that Environment America Research and Policy Center really has one mission, and that's to protect our natural world. We envision a greener and a healthier America, one where more places are protected so that all life can thrive, and an America that offers us and our children the opportunity to live healthier and more enriching lives. And reducing our dependence on fossil fuels and moving to 100% renewable energy is very much consistent with that mission. So in terms of today's agenda, I am going to start with a quick overview of our recently released Renewables on the Rise dashboard and share some of the key takeaways so that we go into the roundtable with a shared understanding of the lay of the land of renewable energy in America. And then from there, we'll dive into our roundtable discussion. Then we'll offer you the opportunity to take a timely and targeted action that can really make a difference. And after that, you'll have the chance to ask our panel some questions. And to submit your question, please use the Q&A function of the Zoom platform, which you can see at the bottom of your screen. All right, so a little bit of the stage setting. America has tremendous renewable energy potential. And by working together, we can grow renewable energy and change how we power our country. And when we do that, we'll have cleaner air to breathe, we'll have safer water to drink, and our kids and grandkids will have a cleaner and healthier environment moving forward. Today, America still gets most of its energy from fossil fuels, but it's changing. Renewables are on the rise. And America now gets more than 3 times as much power from the wind, the sun, and the earth as we did just a decade ago. And we're seeing growth in all 50 states. So to help document that remarkable growth and to help spur additional progress, Environment America Research and Policy Center has partnered with Frontier Group for the last 8 years to create and then annually update our Renewables on the Rise dashboard. And I'll put a link into the chat briefly to the dashboard so that you can tinker around with some of the data in there yourself. But basically, the dashboard allows you to see your state's progress towards 100% renewable energy, and it allows you to explore really the 10-year trend lines of some of the key clean energy technologies and compare it across states. So for now, I'm just going to briefly summarize some of the most recent data up through 2023 so that we have a shared understanding of where we are. And I'm going to start with solar. So solar energy in America now produces enough electricity to power 22 million homes. That's more than 8 times as much solar energy as our country harnessed just a decade ago. Wind power too is on the rise. Wind powers 39 million typical homes as of last year, and that's more than twice as much wind power as we got a decade ago. Battery storage is a huge success in the past few years. We now have more than 15.5 gigawatts of battery energy storage. That's 97 times as much storage as we had on the grid a decade ago, and it's grown rapidly in recent years with a 72% rise from 2022 to 2023. And Texas and California, which are states that are well represented on today's roundtable, have really been leading the charge on battery storage. Electric vehicles also are going to play a key role in the energy transition. And there are now more than 3 million electric vehicles registered in America, which is close to 25 times as many as were on the road 10 years ago. And again, we have really one of the nation's leading electric vehicle experts on the roundtable discussion today. The charging infrastructure to power those electric vehicles is also improving. As of the end of last year, America had more than 176,000 charging ports, which was 7 times more than we had 10 years ago. And just from 2022 to 2023, charging infrastructure increased by 22%. And then last but not least, energy efficiency improvements continue to play a really significant role in just reducing how much energy we need to produce as a country, period. Utility energy efficiency improvements just installed in 2022 alone saved enough energy to power 25 million homes for 1 year. So those are some of the baseline points. I find all those facts incredibly encouraging, but we also need to pick up the pace on the adoption of these technologies. And so I'm really excited today for our panel discussion where we're going to dig into some of the latest trends and some stories, as well as some of the challenges that we're going to need to overcome in order to help renewable energy reach its potential. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and move into the roundtable portion of today's webinar. We have some really great speakers, and rather than me continuing to talk, we're going to allow them to introduce themselves. So Brad, why don't we start with you? If you could just share a little bit of your background working on renewables, what you do now, and yeah.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Johanna. Yeah, I appreciate you having me here. Happy to be part of this and connect with folks. My name is Brad Hebner. I'm the policy director of CALSA, California Solar and Storage Association. I've been doing this type of work for 25 plus years. Many of those years was with the Environment America network of organizations in various roles, pushing clean energy around the country, including tailpipe emissions and wind and solar and other greenhouse gas reduction. For the past 11 years, I have been here in California focused exclusively on solar and battery storage. So CALSA, our trade group, represents 700 different businesses that are involved in solar and storage in California. About 2/3 of those are contractors of all shades all over the state. And then the other third are manufacturers and financiers, everyone else involved in the business. So it's a big tent, and we love pushing solar here.
Awesome. All right, we started in California. Next, we're going to move to Texas, which is also kind of a juggernaut when it comes to renewables.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and yeah, thanks for doing this. Really excited to hear what the co-panelists here have to say. I am Doug Lewin. The slide before that had one of my affiliations. I am an associate professor of practice at the LBJ School here in Austin, but also consultant focused on clean energy issues. And I write a newsletter, the Texas Energy and Power newsletter, and have a podcast called the Energy Capital Podcast. All of that is at douglewin.com. I've worked on energy issues, energy, environment, climate, renewables, energy efficiency. Probably spent more time on energy efficiency than any of the other things in Texas for 20 years now, which feels wild to say out loud, but it's been 2 decades now. So thanks again for having me.
Awesome. Great to have you. Thanks for joining us. Ben, you want to go next?
Great. Nice to see everyone, and thanks for having me. And hopefully the noise doesn't get too loud in the background. I'm at a conference right now, and it seems very connected to the discussion today called Deploy 24, and it's all about the loan office, the DOE loan office, and some of the investments that are being made that are catalyzing all kinds of projects across the country, and big investments in battery manufacturing and EV manufacturing, solar, wind, all kinds of fun stuff. So I guess brief background for me. So there's a theme maybe that I also too started my career in the Environment America family of organizations many, many moons ago. The gray beard is probably an indication that it was a long time ago, but I've been at the Electrification Coalition for the last 11 years. And when you're starting to introduce some of the 25% or 25 times more vehicles on the road, I started at a time when there were really just a couple EVs as an option, very nascent technology. And so it's incredible to see how much we've already had the opportunity to accelerate the transition. And sometimes one of the things that we don't even think about is this is not just cars, but it's trucks and buses. It's a thing that's happening globally. But our role in the organization and the work we do is a combination of local, state, and federal policy and implementation. And we do it with a little bit of a unique spin, which is about the economic and national security impacts of oil dependency. And that puts us at great economic and national security risk because it has a monopoly on our transportation sector. And so that's really why we're working to accelerate transportation electrification, and excited to be here today and talk more with y'all.
So awesome. Thanks for joining us. And for what it's worth, we can't hear the conference background noise, so bravo. All right, last but not least, Tony Dutzik.
Thanks, Johanna. Great to see everybody. My name is Tony Dutzik. I'm the Associate Director and Senior Policy Analyst at Frontier Group. We're a research and policy organization whose mission is to provide information and ideas to build a healthier, more sustainable America. We are close partners with Environment America, and we're worked with Johanna and Environment America to produce the Renewables on the Rise dashboard that she just discussed recently. I have been doing work related to clean energy for a little more than 20 years. Our role here has been to help create a vision of what a clean energy and renewable energy future might look like for America, and work to provide ideas and information and research that supports the policy transition to help us realize that vision of a clean energy future. So in addition to working on the Renewables on the Rise dashboard, we've done a number of projects in recent years looking at the potential for solar energy on things like warehouses and superstores, and also work over the years on energy efficiency, electric vehicles, and the whole 9 yards. So really excited for the conversation.
Awesome. Great. Well, let's get into it. So we're going to start by just talking about solar, in part because it's our most abundant renewable energy source. And Brad, I was hoping to start with you, although others can feel free to weigh in, obviously. Solar is growing by leaps and bounds. 78% of the new energy capacity that came online in 2024 so far this year has been solar. And a lot of that growth has been driven by improved efficiency, lower costs for the technologies, as well as just policies that support solar adoption. I was hoping you could give just like a snapshot of like, what are the exciting trends that you see? What are the challenges you see? And yeah, where are things at with solar?
Yeah, great. So we should probably talk separately about large scale, solar power plants and customer rooftop solar, both residential, commercial, and agricultural. They're very different markets, but they're both growing. And it's great that solar has become mainstream. It's not a niche. It's not really the alternative anymore. It's a mainstream product, and at the utility scale, power plant level, it's just competing based on pure business. And we still do have the federal tax credit, which makes a big difference. But with that tax credit, it's just a business decision. And it's out-competing gas. It's long out-competed coal, and that's what we're building. That's what we will build going forward. Is more solar power plants. We need to step up the pace, as you said. It needs to be more than just steady as she goes. We need to pick up the pace, but we're on course for that. On the customer solar side, there's ups and downs all over the place in different states or different places with the policies and the market conditions. One important factor is that the utilities are just very much in opposition to customer solar. And the reason is that they make their money from building long distance transmission lines. That's what their profits are based on. And so they want a system that is based on faraway power plants and more transmission and substations. And it's unfortunate that we have this battle, that we can't just partner. In many ways, we do partner with the utilities just in practical day-to-day, but in the policy level, we're very much at odds. And so, we're thinking of creative ways to get around their perverse incentive against solar, but in the meantime, it's sort of a battle. And they have amped up their opposition over time. We used to, when I first started doing this, it was actually quite collaborative, but they turned the corner on that and have seen us as the opposition for a long time. So,
and Brad, do you think that is largely a function of rooftop solar just growing to the point where they feel threatened? buy
Yes,
it?
absolutely. That's true. Once we got big, they thought about us differently and started to see us as competition. And more recently, now that we have battery storage going in with solar, it really improves our ability to satisfy our energy needs locally. And we need the grid a lot less. I mean, this is just, the way things are. And that threatens them. They're acting rationally, right? Because that's their profit incentive. And now that we're big enough and we're more autonomous and resilient, they see it as a threat. So, the good side is the public wants more solar. We have government initiatives for low carbon grid, and so we do absolutely need more solar, and we're getting through those debates. But they end up being fights. Here in California, it was a many year long policy debate, and it was very much us versus them on how we changed the net metering rules, and what credit we get for putting energy on the grid, and can you self-consume without a tax on that self generation. And we got through that, sort of middle course where there's still, a strong opportunity to go solar from the customer perspective, but it took a hit in the customer economics. So the market here for the past year has been very much in turmoil. It's been a difficult time. There have been layoffs and bankruptcies that are extremely painful for the solar industry, and it's entirely driven by the policies adopted by the state and the poorly managed transition towards policy, towards a new set of policies. So ideally, we get through that. We're hoping to rebound soon, and we'll see here in California. The thing that I think is most unfortunate is other states are following the lead of changing this net metering policy that happened in California when they just have very small amounts of solar. And it's really not even time to start discussing what to do with a new form of net metering. And again, it's the utilities that have found a successful message and a political strategy, and they knocked us back in California, and they're on the attack in other states. So we just have to keep at it everywhere.
Interesting. The thing that's striking to me is like rooftop solar alone can't meet all of our electricity needs. And especially as we electrify more of the heating and transportation in America, we're going to need more load or more generation for electricity. So it does seem like, I don't know, there's enough for everybody, but that
Yeah,
must
we need
not be
more
how
of
the
both. It's
utility
true.
companies see it.
Yeah, it's not large scale versus rooftop in our view at all. We need more both. I mean, we could meet it, technically we have the potential to do it all with local rooftop. It's not necessarily the cheapest, we want to have some of the large scale too. An efficient system has a lot of both. You're absolutely right.
Cool. Doug,
Well,
how
the other
is,
thing-
yep, go ahead, jump in.
No, I was just, and I'm interested to hear Doug's story on this too, from the Texas perspective. The other thing that I think tends to get lost in this conversation are the other benefits that distributed and rooftop solar bring beyond just the carbon and decarbonization benefits, and resilience is a critical one. And you see this in parts of the country that are increasingly being challenged by extreme weather events. The difficulty, the importance of having, whether it's an EV battery in the driveway or battery storage in your garage, that ability to weather a storm or to recover from disaster with power that you generate locally and that you store locally. And I think that's an important part of the story that sometimes in the debates about the economics of net metering, like rooftop solar is actually really special. It delivers values that utility scale solar just doesn't. And it's important to kind of keep that in mind in the conversation too.
Awesome.
Good
Doug,
time for
you
me to
anything-
jump in.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So on that point from Tony, there's no doubt in Texas we are seeing a huge increase in distributed generation, largely because of the troubles with the electric grid. So obviously, famously, Winter Storm Uri in 2021, Texans
And
were
Doug, for those of us who maybe aren't steeped in when you say distributed generation, what does that mean for the
so like rooftop solar, although we're seeing big increases in Texas also of batteries and also of natural gas generators. Now, the natural gas generators, especially at somebody's home, generally are for emergency purposes only. But in Houston, there's been a huge increase. There were, after Winter Storm Uri, there were waiting lists for months, or in some cases years, because people were so traumatized by that, and now by the outages during Uri. And then this last summer, I'm not sure people outside of Texas quite realize how, or even within Texas, but outside the Houston area, how bad Hurricane Beryl was over the summer, where hundreds of thousands of Houstonians were without power for over a week. So again, another sharp rise in people trying to get distributed generation, solar, a storage in the form of a, whether it's a power wall or Enphase or whatever it is, some kind of battery in their garage, and potentially a gas generator. So the resilience benefits of that distributed generation is large. Of course, if you do solar, and particularly if you do solar and storage, you're not using it just for emergency like you would with a gas generator. You're using it day in and day out to lower your energy bills. But there is that resilience benefit, and Tony's exactly right. Like a lot of times, we're just doing a cost benefit analysis only on how much the bill savings are. But you have to factor in there is a value in knowing that the next time a storm hits, you're going to have power at your house. You can help out your neighbors. There's all these stories around Texas of people during Hurricane Beryl. Sunrun had posted some to their website about some of their customers actually helping their whole street. People were bringing over extension cords to power up their devices on the 5th and 6th and 7th day of the outages. So there's huge advantages there. Let me just say, though, just to back up and just look at Texas as a big picture, because actually distributed generation, that distributed solar and storage, is actually an area where we lag severely. California is beating Texas in a major way on that particular metric. I think California has something like 5, 6, 7 times as much distributed solar as Texas. Australia similarly, has like 20,000 megawatts of distributed solar. Texas maybe has 3 or 4,000. California, I think also, y'all can correct me on this, but I think has somewhere around 15, 20,000 megawatts. Again, Texas at like 3 or 4. Where Texas excels, where there's a really great story in Texas, is on the bulk system, the large solar arrays that are going in all over the state. And Texas is well over 25,000 megawatts. To put that in perspective, the peak usage for the grid ever is somewhere around 85,000, a little above 85,000. So 25,000 is a lot. Just since the beginning of 2023, so just through the end of September, so 7 quarters, Texas has put in about 20,000 megawatts of solar. These numbers are like stunning and almost like crazy, like basically a gigawatt worth of solar every month in the state of Texas alone. If you would have told me that 10 years ago, maybe even 5 or 6 years ago, I would have said there's just no way. That's a lovely ambition, but there's absolutely no way we could install that much solar. And yet here we are. It's really happening incredibly fast. On the dashboard, y'all have the numbers from last year on storage at like 3,000 or 4,000. We're up to 10,000 megawatts of storage. So at the time of Winter Storm Uri, we had 200 megawatts. We're up to 10,000. That's 50x increase in less than 4 years. So that's really where Texas is really a sort of a bright, shining star.
And what's the secret to Texas's success there? Because, I'm zooming in from New England, and we are really struggling to build utility scale solar systems in the region.
Yeah, I think there's probably, 3 main factors I would cite. One is just the natural resource, right? As Texas is a very, very sunny state, and particularly out in West Texas, it's the natural sort of resource is great because the sun is setting later in West Texas than it is on our load centers, like for instance in Houston. California is kind of the reverse, right? Where the best resources is east of the load centers. So it's very sunny where the solar resources is situated particularly well. Texas has, famously like very little sort of regulation, which is a real problem in sort of some other spheres like oil and gas and power plants and stuff like that, but it allows things to be infrastructure to be built very, very quickly. And then the market, Texas market structure, we don't have a capacity market. We have what's called an energy only market, which basically means that the lowest cost gets dispatched first, and solar and wind are the lowest cost. So those are the three factors that I think are most driving the growth here.
Fascinating. I want to pivot a little bit to talk about the transportation sector, in part because roughly a little bit more than a quarter of America's energy use goes towards moving people and goods around. And so in order to kind of get to an economy powered by renewable energy, we can't just do electricity, we have to tackle transportation as well. So Ben, can you talk a little bit about electric vehicles, how far they've come, and like what your organization sees as kind of like the key priorities to keep growing electric vehicles in the United States?
Sure. And it's actually been an interesting conversation around cost and diversity of resources. And I think one of the things that we always talk about is it's the idea that every vehicle that plugs in is plugging into a domestically produced resource that can be distributed. In fact, in many cases, it can be an enabler of all these other technologies. And the cool thing about an EV in some ways is it doesn't care how the electrons are produced, right? It just cares that it gets them. And it actually helps drive grid efficiency. Like, so then when you think about it, all these different resources, they kind of come on and off at different points, right? And some of them at night, wind blows at night, like lots and lots of wind. And so like the benefit of an EV is they're oftentimes plugging in and able to capture all this energy production at times when maybe we don't have a lot of demand. And it's a funny thing because it's actually going to help drive downward pressure on rates too, right? So that's good for everybody. It's going to make electricity cheaper, which is a weird sort of like counterintuitive concept, right? Like more load, more cars on the grid, you'd go, oh, that's going to mean electricity costs more. But the reality is actually all the wires and the distribution system, all that stuff just gets more efficient because it's utilized better and it's utilized more often. And the cool thing about an EV and charging and all this stuff is it's not dumb. It's actually really, really smart technology. And so it can suck the energy in at the times when there's the greatest capacity. And of course, it has to match up with like, when do people need to drive? But for the most part, if you own an EV, you realize this very quickly. You kind of plug in at night and you wake up in the morning and it's full. And it's this sort of different dynamic that we have to get our heads wrapped around for most consumers and even businesses for that matter, is it charges while you are doing other stuff. And that's not how we think about sort of gas and our the way we experience fueling. So there's just this interesting, as we're going through this renewables discussion, or you all talking about the benefits. It's cool because like EVs in some ways are going to reap all those benefits and in fact help support them. But I talked about it at the beginning. We're an economic and national security centered organization. And so it's a really important conversation to be having right now, especially as we've seen EVs become very polarized. And the idea that it's a red or a blue issue, and a little corny, but I'm going to talk about it, should be a red, white, and blue issue. Because we even the people who want to drill more, right? Drill, baby, drill. Like the dynamic there is that doesn't stop price spikes. It doesn't stop the impacts of supply that can be constrained by bad actors from around the world. And that puts us at sort of all this economic and national security risk, not to mention the incredible amounts of blood and treasure that we have to spend to protect the flow of oil. Even though we're a net exporter on oil right now, those dynamics still exist. We saw that happen with what was taking place in Russia and their aggression in the Ukraine, where it suddenly impacted the way that oil prices went all over the place. So that giving you the framing, I think oftentimes we talk about the climate benefits of electrification, right? It's an obvious one. There's no tailpipe. So it's zero pollution from the tailpipe. And as the grid cleans up, that means another cool thing, an EV is the only car on the road that actually will get cleaner over time. There's actually a cool study that Denver did on their fleet vehicles with a Nissan Leaf, and they tracked it over several years. And the EV became less impactful during that 3-year period because the grid in Denver was cleaning up. And then it's a place for individual action, right? So we talk about rooftop. And the cool thing is I could put rooftop on my house, and then all of the electrons going into my car immediately means I've taken that out of the system demand that has to exist. And the way that I think about what that power, production has to come from. But we how do we do that? So we're a big part of like real world projects, and it's happening on the ground with cities. So we're a part of something called the Bloomberg American Sustainable Cities program, where there's 25 leading cities that are focused on transportation electrification strategies. And it's everything from how do you incorporate them into your bus and transit, because EV buses work awesome, but they're just not happening fast enough. It's how do you incorporate EVs into your fleets. And we actually created a total cost of ownership tool on our site. And it basically demonstrates that over time, EVs will actually be cheaper to operate. Now, there might be currently higher upfront costs. And so that's a thing that we have to fix. And there's financing tools and all kinds of other things that help us fix that, in addition to some tax credits. But the reality is, over their total lifespan, EVs, whether it's a truck, a bus, or a car, are ultimately going to be cheaper. And especially in states where gas prices are really high, and electricity is really cheap. And especially when you start to get into using distributed resources, so solar, wind, other things, to power those vehicles. So it's kind of this fun moment where they all meet together, and then we all solve these really important social challenges that exist. Now, that being said, and cool, EVs are also just a car, right? It's just a thing that people need to get from point A to point B, or a bus or a truck. And the really amazing thing is the technology is better. And so if you've gotten behind the wheel, and that's a problem we have in this country, is not enough people have. So yes, we have 3 million cars on the road, but we have a lot more cars that people drive on a daily basis. And just to give a sense, we sell about 12 to 18 million new cars on an annual basis, and then about 42 million used cars, right? So every year, that's what's happening in our system. So we have a long ways to go, but it's happening really fast. We hit 10% market for the first time this last year. We're seeing record sales. I think one challenge is everybody thought all the incentives that were through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a landmark policy that put a ton of resources into supporting transportation electrification, and then the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is building out a nationwide charging network right now. It takes a long time for those resources to hit the ground and have that kind of the impact that they should and will have. And so sometimes, we think it's just going to like rocket. The market's going to rocket, but it's going to take a little bit longer. And then I'll add one last piece just to put some of this in context, which is this is a global competition we're in right now. The world is going electric, and it's no longer a question of if we will drive electric vehicles. It's just a question of when. And right now, we have countries that are way outpacing us. They're eating our lunch. They are, they're going after lithium reserves, which is what you need to make the batteries. In some instances, we have different battery chemistries that are coming. But they've also really created policies that are way more aggressive than the US has been able to create. And China is really the kind of lead there. And the challenge there is if the US does not get aggressive, not only are we potentially not driving EVs, and we are beholden to the oil industry or to oil as a monopoly on our transportation sector, but we also have the potential to lose $1 trillion a year industry that is huge for jobs, because we'll lose it to the rest of the world. And we have to make cars that the world is going to buy. And so it's really important that we are aggressive and we keep our foot on the accelerator to drive transportation electrification. And the good thing is they're better.
And Ben, you talked a little bit about charging. I think there are, for better or right, people are used to being able to just like pull up to a gas pump and 10 minutes later they have a full tank of gas. Charging an EV requires a rethink. So either charging at home or having confidence that there's a public charger somewhere. You talked about how the Inflation Reduction Act kind of conceives of the architecture of a nationwide charging network. How significant from your standpoint are the like perceived or real charging concerns, and how do we best overcome them so that more people are like, heck yeah, my next car is going to be an EV?
There's a couple different ways to sort of slice this, and just for it's like way in the weeds, but the NEVI program is actually under the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that's where those resources
does NEVI stand for?
Sorry, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Good call on the acronym. So let's see how many other acronyms I can throw into this really quickly. Just kidding. So, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, shorthand, NEVI, much easier to say that, is really designed with the intent to put a charging station every 50 miles on our US highways and interstates, right? And so that's really important. It is an important perception issue, but it'll also enable a lot of travel that right now is a little more challenging for people. There is way more charging out there than you think, though. And you talked about at the beginning, it's actually closer to 200,000 ports that are in the US. And there's different types of charging, right? So like most of what people are doing at home is level 1, like a regular old plug in your house that you use anything else, or level 2, which is basically your dryer, right? Your clothes dryer. We all have this in our houses for the most part, and even like multi-use dwellings or multi-family dwellings or apartments, that kind of things. We're starting to see that solutions come up for how that will get serviced as well. But the biggest difference is if you drive a gas car on a daily basis, you're driving, and then at the end of the week or whatever it is, you go to the gas station and you've got to stop and you fill up and you do that. In our house, we never go to the gas station. I have a 7-year-old. She's never been, except for she thinks it's an awesome place to get candy or other garbage food. And so it is this thing where you skip the gas station. We wake up every morning, the car is full. I actually let my 7-year-old plug our car in. I would never let a 7-year-old put gas in the car because it's an incredibly safe and clean thing. But it really does change that thing where you're just every morning it's full. You don't have to think about it. It's done. You have apps on your phone to tell you it's, what's happening. So all this stuff is like, enabling all the other technology advances we see to have this awesome car that does all this good stuff. I will mention the average person drives less than 40 miles a day, right? So we have this very irrational thinking about cars, and I get it. We all do it. And we think, I hate the term range anxiety. I really prefer range uncertainty because it's much more about the idea of just if you don't know, you think it's a problem, right? But I would guarantee most people, not everyone, but most people who buy an EV, that range uncertainty goes away really quickly for the most part. Not everywhere, but for the most part. And it's because the phone tells you where the chargers are. Your car tells you where your chargers are. It's very good at telling you when you need to stop and get charging to meet your destination. And then there's other parts. We just drove I live in North Carolina. A couple of years ago, we drove, I'm going to use a different story. We drove from North Carolina to Utah. That's a long ways. And we did it in our EV. And it took us just a little bit longer. And in reality, it was the better driving experience because we got out every 2 hours. We stopped, we charged for 15 minutes. And, with the kids, et cetera, it ended up being one of those things where we actually arrived much less tired and much less impacted by that trip instead of what I remember as a kid, which is it's like, no, we're going to power through. We're going to drive as far as we can. You're going to hold it. You're not going to, you're going to stop on the side of the road to use the restroom. None of that stuff has to exist anymore. So I think the children of America are going to celebrate the EV part of this too. But even just in a very short few years, charging has gotten way faster and cars go way further. And I think that's the other part is it's not even the car my dad would have driven kind of moment for an EV. Now they already go much further, much faster. And so that's the other part. It's a rapidly improving system. And if you bought your EV today, it's way better than the EV that somebody would have bought 10 years ago.
Right. Anybody else want to share EV road trip stories?
I'm not going to share an EV road trip story. I just want to say, I've now had an EV for 3 months, and I was all ready to have an electrician come and upgrade to a level 2. I still haven't done it, and I don't need to. I drive 30 to 40 miles in an average day, get home at 7 or 8, plug it in, it's full by the morning. I just think the whole if you're going on a road trip, you got to plan it out, but 99% of your trips are going to be in your own city, and your level 1 is totally fine. I don't think this is said enough. I didn't realize it when I got the EV. I thought for sure I was going to have to make expensive upgrades, and I didn't.
And even putting in level 2 charging actually is not a very expensive thing to do. And I say that relatively speaking, right? It's not expensive, relatively speaking. But the other thing is a lot of utilities actually have good incentive programs to support installing EV infrastructure. If you buy Ford right now, they actually help you with, or some of several of the automakers, they often have incentives to even help with installing level 2 charging. So it's like, do your homework a little bit, look into it. We have some stuff on our website at theelectrificationcoalition.org, just to show you that there are lots of ways to do this that don't cost a lot and it works way better than you think. And that's like,
Cool.
that feels like a good thing, right? It
Yeah.
works better
Yes,
than
it
you
does.
think, and it doesn't cost a lot.
Yep.
Awesome. All right, I want to talk a little bit about energy efficiency, just because we have folks who have dug into this in pretty substantive ways. And, you know, there's no doubt, I mean, the amount of energy that is wasted in this country is truly staggering. Close to 2/3 of the energy that we produce never actually gets put to work doing anything productive for society. So I'm just curious to hear from our panel, like, where are we seeing energy efficiency wins? Where are we seeing backsliding on energy efficiency? And like, what are big opportunities coming down the pike? Doug, I'm gonna punt this your way for starters.
Yeah, thanks. So look, I mean, Texas again, like I will, I'm a Texas cheerleader for a lot of things. And, you know, what we've done on wind and solar batteries on the bulk grid is extraordinary. Energy efficiency is not a bright spot in Texas. We have not increased the energy efficiency incentives that are out there for consumers to be able to make the right choice that is supportive of the grid and helps them in the longer term, even in the shorter term, on their bills, to get past that higher upfront cost of, for instance, a high efficiency heat pump versus, you know, keeping the old AC backed up by resistance heat. It's a very inefficient form of heat. It's what is driving our winter peaks and making problems like Winter Storm Uri far worse than they otherwise would be. But those programs have not increased since 2011. So we're coming up on 14 years of stagnation. There are some good things happening. Our PUC in Texas has a energy efficiency office now, and there's things happening here. I know the other panelists want to say stuff, so I'll just stop with this. Whatever level of renewables folks want to get to, and even like you could even take renewables out of the conversation. Just having an active demand side makes your grid more reliable and affordable and sustainable, right? Like all of, even if you're only worried about one of those three things and you don't care about the other two, an active demand side, which is energy efficiency, but also things like what Ben is talking about with, you know, where we talk about charging an electric vehicle, charging it at the right time when there's plenty of capacity available, smart charging, that is part of an active demand side, right? Pre-cooling our homes when there's plenty of solar in Texas. Even on a hot summer day, we can use more power so then we're using less when the sun is going down. Electric hot water heaters, pool pumps, refrigerators, all of these things have the ability to move demand. And we're also now entering this era, you know, it's been talked about a lot, but of really rapid load growth like we maybe potentially, we don't know yet, but it sure is looking like more and more we're going to see load growth like we haven't seen since the post-World War II era. So having that energy efficiency and expanding that definition of what energy efficiency means, because it's actually energy efficient to use more electricity, right? When you think transportation is sort of a poster child for this, but you see it with industrial uses as well. Energy efficiency is going to become more and more important. You know, we can't waste energy. We've got to use it at the right times, use more of it at the right times and less of it at times of scarcity.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's two halves to that. As Doug said, there's just having more efficient products, and then also the time of when you're using electricity is equally important, even more important these days. So here in California, and then on the efficiency side, there's two halves of that. There's new products and programs to get people to change out their clunky old products. And the efficiency standards of new products has been a huge bright spot of where we've made great strides, and especially here in California. You know, when you buy a new refrigerator, it's got to be much more efficient, and a ceiling fan, a light bulb. You can't buy anything but an LED light bulb right now. And there was resistance to that at first, but people accept it pretty quickly. And then we need other states to follow suit and just make sure that all new products are more efficient. On the existing, we spent a lot of money with incentives to try to get people to junk their old refrigerator and other things like that. those programs always underperform. It's a lot of money that gets spent on program administration and not enough uptake. So we need to keep at it, but it's unfortunate those aren't more successful. But then going forward, it really is as much or more about when you use energy. And that's something that is very exciting to me, is that these programs that can aggregate different thermostats from all over the neighborhood to make sure you're coordinated and you're doing the pre-cooling of your house and you're not using power at the time that the grid constraint is high. Because when the grid is constrained, that's when we're firing up the fossil fuel generators. Those are the dirty times of the grid when we're having a challenge having enough power. And so it's not just the number of kilowatt hours per year in energy efficiency the way we used to think about it. It's really when you use power. And so, and especially with customer batteries now, and the fact that we can operate as a fleet, homes and businesses using their energy consuming devices in addition to customer batteries, and to move around. And then EV charging is a huge one there, where we communicate with all these chargers and we can coordinate the charging. So just in terms of expense and in terms of getting to 100%, doing it the old way isn't going to work. We did a study here in California a year or two ago that found that in order to fuel all the electric vehicles that we plan to deploy, it would cost the utilities $50 billion between now and 2035 to build enough grid infrastructure to bring in the power to power all those cars and other building electrification strategies. And secondarily, it found even if we didn't care about spending all that money, utilities probably couldn't even build the grid fast enough. So that's going to be the choke point. We're not going to be able to put in as many EV chargers as we want if we're relying on the old method, on utilities to just build a bigger grid and pipe in power from far away. But we have new strategies now. We can do this coordinated energy consumption, coordinated chargers of EVs, coordinated dispatch of batteries in order to avoid overbuilding the grid. And we'll have the power for these new devices without having to pipe as much of it from faraway sources.
Yeah,
Love
Hannah,
it.
can I just
Energy
jump
system
in?
of the future, right? Sorry, Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, just to jump in real quickly. Doug's experience of efficiency investments lagging in Texas is not unusual. One of the less rosy indicators on our renewables on the RISE dashboard was looking at the trajectory of the amount of electricity that it was being saved by utility energy efficiency programs. And that plateaued a few years ago and has actually declined slightly since. The American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy found that utility spending on energy efficiency programs is actually down. And when you think about all of the load growth that is coming, all of the new demand for electricity, it's kind of crazy that we're not maximizing our investment in improving energy efficiency. The good news, the positive stories, and Johanna, you had a big role to play in this, is that we do, at the federal level, the Biden administration moved forward with a number of strong energy efficiency standards for a variety of pieces of appliances and equipment that will deliver some of those benefits that Brad was talking about in California. And then, a lot of folks are obviously concerned about the future of the Inflation Reduction Act, but there is a huge program that is a part of that law that is just now really getting rolling in a number of states, which is the home energy rebates. And these are targeted for primarily low and middle income people, but they provide incredibly generous incentives, mainly for energy efficiency improvements. And so, to the extent that your state has a rebate program up and running, encourage your friends and neighbors to look into it, because it is, it's so generous as to almost be, to leave money on the ground, to not take advantage of it. And if your state hasn't implemented the program yet, get them to do it. And then, working with, I'm sure many people on this call, do what you can to defend those chunks of the Inflation Reduction Act, because I think in terms of sparking, really dramatic changes in efficiency, electrification at the grassroots level. It's a really important program, and it's one that hopefully we'll be able to defend.
And just real quick, just in 30 seconds, that is a huge point, and every state should be going after those dollars, and it's a real bright spot. There's also the $2,000 tax credit. We don't know what's going to happen with for heat pumps and for other energy efficiency. I'll make the disclaimer: consult your accountant or tax professional. I'm not giving tax advice, but there is a limit of 2,000 per year. So if you're looking at doing a project, talk to your accountant. But you might be able to do 2,000 credit this year and 2,000 in January. Since we're talking on December 5th, I know this is going to be recorded, but anyway, so I just wanted to highlight the tax credits as well. Really important, the Homes and HERA program for folks that don't have a tax burden to do energy efficiency, and those dollars will be coming in 2025 if they're not already there. But for folks that do have a tax burden and can use the tax credits, they exist now, and now is a really good time to look into using them.
Cool. All right. I feel like we could definitely do like one of these webinars every week and still not get through a bunch of the content. But I want to make sure that we are respectful of people's time and get to a couple of the questions. So I'm going to talk quickly about one particularly important and targeted action right now. And Tony alluded to it, but my team and I have been working very steadily over the course of the past few years to advance energy efficiency improvements in the United States. And over the course of the past 4 years, the Department of Energy has made tremendous progress in cutting energy waste by setting appliance efficiency standards. To give you a sense of just how significant those savings will be from the standards that have already been completed, they're going to reduce global warming pollution equivalent to 2.1 billion metric tons over 30 years. So that's the pollution equivalent of taking 183 gas-fired power plants offline for that same period. So we've already made tremendous progress, but there's more to do. There is currently a suite of 10 additional standards that have been finalized by the Department of Energy, and they're just like kind of caught up in bureaucratic red tape towards the end of the session or towards the end of the term. And we are really leaning on the White House to go ahead and finalize those standards. And if they do, it'll reduce pollution again to the equivalent of taking another 74 gas-fired power plants offline. So we plan to deliver a petition to the White House next week. And I wanted to invite you to add your name to that petition. So you can either scan this QR code on the screen to sign the petition, or in just a second, I'll put a link to the digital petition in the chat, and you can add your name there. Thanks in advance for any action you can take. I think the White House is concerned that maybe Congress would roll back some of these rules, and they're right to be concerned, but in consultation with all of our allies in the Department of Energy, I think better to go ahead and finalize the suite and then, have the fight another day rather than to not try. Okay, so with that, let's move on to Q&A. I've seen some really great questions pop up. So the first question was, how important is bi-directional exchange of power between vehicles and the grid going to be in the future? So we've touched on this a little bit, but maybe we can put a finer point on it.
I'll jump in, and then I'm sure there's some different views that others have, but it's a bit of a new technology still overall, so it's not something that the average consumer has access to unless they have a Ford Lightning and a few cars, and it's not even bi-directional exactly. It just allows you to tap into the battery to use it. But it is going to be, I think it is a future part of what the system is going to look like, and for two reasons. One is because if it's a grid tied asset, even though it has wheels, it's going to solve all kinds of problems with peak. So like when we have lots of demand for power, if we are spreading that out around a ton of cars, then it solves some problems. And there's an industry there. It's a way so that's part two, is it's a way for these to all become potentially a valuable asset for big fleets, but even maybe for consumers. And there's already examples of that in other parts of the world where they're starting to monetize this access to that battery storage that's on wheels. And then it's even an interesting one. We were talking about, the disaster relief. And so there's actually a lot of thinking going on around the idea of bidirectional capacity for bigger assets of buses, school buses, et cetera, and that those can be deployed when we have big hurricanes. And you could just imagine those stories that existed where it was people using cars to power their neighborhoods. Just think if you could then take the school bus out, and it has Wi-Fi and it has the battery that can be used, and so it becomes this mobile communications tool that also has power that can offer short-term relief in these really extreme weather events. So it's gonna be there. It's just we're not quite there in terms of it all being out there. And I will say, part of the reason it's not there is just because there's some things that the auto industry and others still want to figure out around how does it affect the lifespan of the battery and some of those things. But the reality is it's not that hard to do, and most of the vehicles that are already on the road could do it if it was enabled. And it's in many cases, it's just a software change for a lot of these vehicles. They already have the ability to do it on board the car. So big opportunity, money, and can solve a lot of problems, just not maybe we'll fix, get the other things right first before we sort of start opening the floodgates on that one.
Yeah, I'm just going to really quickly add, I agree with Ben on all of that. I like to think about this and talk about it as being a crawl, walk, run, crawl, manage charging, help people charge at the right times when there's an abundance of power and it's cheap. The walk, I think, is a vehicle to load, just being able to have your battery support a heater or power tools or whatever, and then vehicle to home is part of that as well. That's what Ben was referring to, the lightning being able to do. And then the run is the vehicle to grid. And like everybody wants to talk about vehicle to grid, we got to do the first parts right. And just to put this in perspective, and I mentioned we have an 85 gigawatt peak in Texas. We probably have about 25 to 30 gigawatts of batteries rolling around in Texas and electric vehicles right now. That's with 330,000 electric vehicles. I think California is well over 1 million. There's probably enough capacity in the batteries in California electric vehicles to power the entire California grid for an hour. It's a lot of power, and that's just like we're still in the very early days. So this does need to happen. But we need to take that crawl, walk, run approach, do managed charging, vehicle to home, then vehicle to grid.
Thanks. All right, this is a two-part question. The first is, how can we keep industrial scale solar and battery storage from impacting thousands of acres of intact wildlife habitat across the country? So I think our panelists got to that a little bit around, well, let's maximize rooftop solar for sure. But if folks have any thoughts on best practices for reducing impacts other than, yeah, let's not build it if we don't need it. So let's maximize energy efficiency and let's do as much rooftop as possible. I think that would be helpful. And then the kind of corollary to that is, how do we speed up grid connections for renewable sources? Because there's just a huge backlog of projects in the pipeline, and in certain parts of the country, the grid operators are just, completely unable to integrate those renewable assets into the grid.
Yeah, and the first part of your question there, I am concerned that there'll be a lessening of environmental protections in the drive for large scale solar power plants, and we're already seeing that in some places. There are sensitive areas that get developed. It's basically an industrial operation on open land. One thing that we can do is in farmland that needs to go fallow either for economic reasons or for water reasons, let's identify those places and put the large scale solar there. That's happening in a lot of places where there's water shortages. Used to grow crops there, let's farm energy there instead. Those are already not wild places. So yeah, we need to be very cautious, and I think that absolutely let's do local first. And there are opportunities to do way more than we have done. On the doing local when the utilities are an obstacle, that is an excellent question. Utilities are in control of giving approval for connecting you to the grid. Every solar customer has to get utility approval, and the utilities have an incentive to say no. They have to, by federal law, say yes, but they can drag their feet, which is a painful experience for customers. It just takes longer, and sometimes you're paying money before you can use the system. So we need to push the utilities, and it just takes strong state action. We need state agencies to go in and care about this issue and push the utilities, micromanage them a little bit, and show leadership. and really overseeing the utilities and forcing them to do a better job on timeliness. More than anything, it's not a complicated problem because they need to hire more people to process those applications. The state regulators can force the utilities to staff up and do it more quickly.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think Brad is exactly right that we need to maintain the integrity of our environmental protections, and particularly our protections for our most vulnerable habitats. But the other thing just to recognize in the big picture is that there are so many opportunities to install solar on areas that have already been developed. I mean, we think about residential rooftops, and we have a lot of those in the US, but we've done 2 reports looking at the potential just on warehouses and superstores. And these are big buildings that are usually completely flat and generally not shaded by anything. So, you have that. I know France has just moved to mandate the installation of solar power on parking lots. There's the fallow land that Brad mentioned. There are, interesting experiments and deployments around, so-called agrivoltaics of integrating solar into agricultural land in a way that actually benefits both, creates clean energy and benefits. So there are a ton of creative options. And I think, in addition to protecting and ensuring that our environmental protections remain strong, the other angle is just to tell folks that, in many ways, these trade-offs that are being pushed at us are not necessarily necessary. We have lots of opportunities, lots of spaces, incredible amounts of potential for solar energy that we can really tap without having to put some of our most vulnerable habitats at risk.
Yeah, and I would just highlight, I believe it was Stanford that started a series called something like Uncommon Dialogues, I believe is what it's called. And there's a lot of conservation groups and renewable developers working together to develop best practices. We're going to need to deploy a lot more renewables, and we're going to need to do it in a way that works best with the land. And there are ways to do that. Agrivoltaics a great example. I just saw an article the other day that grape yields get increased when they have solar over them. There's all kinds of ways to deploy renewables and do it in ways that is beneficial. My audio got crackly. Sorry about that. We need to work on this, but we can't slow down renewable deployment. We've got to figure out ways to do it in harmony with the land, and that is very possible.
Great. We are out of time. Thank you so much to our panelists for coming today and sharing their expertise. Thank you to our audience for coming today and tuning in and asking thoughtful questions. We'll make a recording of today's webinar available on the Environment America Research and Policy Center website. And if anyone has any follow-up or thoughts, please don't hesitate to reach out. I can be reached at johanna@environmentamerica.org. And one way or another, by working together, we can help keep renewable energy on the rise in America. So thank you again so much. Take care.